Good morning and welcome to the Daily Politics. The sun is out here at Westminster at last, so join us as we discuss a huge pay rise for MPs. Yes, looks like the poor things will have one forced upon them by the independent authority they set up to decide such matters. But is it right in a time of austerity? Meanwhile, the Tories want a married couple's tax allowance. They're hinting at an announcement in the autumn. But why wait? Croatia became the 28th country to join the European Union at midnight. We'll talk to the leaders of a new campaign to fight British withdrawal. And can we still trust the police in the wake of just too many bad headlines about corruption and undercover cops? All that in the next half an hour. With us for the duration, the former Shadow Home Secretary, David Davis. Welcome to the programme. But first, as I'm sure David will be delighted to learn, is the thorny issue of MPs' pay. Louise Stewart is with us in our newsroom. All right, MPs, Louise, get paid £66,000 a year, and the proposal is that they should get paid £10,000 more. Is that right?
Yes, well, the proposal is from the body that sets these things, an independent body, IPSA, that they should have an increase after the next election, initially to £70,000 and then further increases on top of that. Now, this has always been a controversial issue, and after the expenses scandal 4 years ago, it was decided MPs should no longer decide and set their own pay levels. It should be done by this independent body, but they've now come up with this suggestion, which the Prime Minister David Cameron has said is unthinkable in the current climate unless they were to cut the cost of politics elsewhere. We're not sure how he'd suggest doing that because he wanted to cut the number of MPs, and that was vetoed by the Liberal Democrats. And also the other main party leaders, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband, saying that at a time when public sector workers, nurses, teachers, doctors, etc. have been limited to a 1% pay rise until 2016, it simply wouldn't be right if MPs would be seen to get this whopping great rise.
Louise Stewart, thank you very much. Should you get a whopping pay rise?
No. At the moment, I mean, it is just madness, frankly. I mean, when we're cutting public sector pay, when the private sector is coming under huge pressure, I mean, this is just barking mad. And if ever I need to be persuaded that IPSA is out of touch with reality, this is it.
But it's going to be forced on you. You're not going to have a say.
That's ridiculous, because Parliament can make up its mind about whatever it wants to make up its mind about.
But I thought the whole point was MPs wouldn't vote on this.
Yeah, but I think the problem here, well, the government may have to legislate to stop it, frankly.
But I mean, that would be ridiculous, won't it, having set up an independent body to adjudicate on this.
But I don't think when they started down the road, they thought that, A, we'd be in the parlour state we are economically now, and B, that they'd come up with a proposal like this.
Would you decline to accept a £10,000 pay rise?
That's sort of silly, I would actually propose a motion to stop it. That's a much better way of doing it, because the point about this is about trust with the public, and the public at large will just not see the point of this. And I think that's the real issue.
All right. I mean, if you would put forward a motion to stop it going ahead, you won't say whether you would decline to accept it. And is that because, in principle, even though you think the timing is wrong, because, as you say, public sector pay is being frozen, no one's getting big pay rises, but in principle, do you agree that MPs should be paid more?
Yes, given the time. But the simple point is this is the wrong time. I mean, the issue here is one. There's a massive issue. We can talk about it later in the programme. Trust in public services generally, and trust with MPs is not at an all-time high. Let's put it at least at that level. And this will do huge damage to the bond between the public and the people who represent them.
What about married couples' tax allowance? Something that many Tory colleagues of yours would like to see happen. Do you support the idea?
Including me, yes. It's long overdue. I mean, what's proposed really is almost symbolic. It's not very much.
No, what is it, £150?
150 quid. I mean, and it's long overdue. I mean, the simple truth is that raising children, the purpose of marriage in the day, is best under stable household, and the most stable are married couples, so we should encourage it. It's as simple as that.
And is it a priority for now? Or are you happy for it to wait to the autumn?
I wouldn't wait, but the truth of the matter is they've got an autumn statement coming. I guess they want to put it in that.
Should it be means tested, like child benefit?
No. Well, the point about a tax allowance is it bites into whatever income you have. No, I don't think it should. I mean, tax allowances are tax allowances. You start to means test something like that, it becomes incredibly complicated. And you run into the sort of problems we had with the child benefit. You know, I mean, look what happened when they tried to means test that. It's a complete.
And is this a sort of quid pro quo, if you like?
Well, I hope not. No, this is about reinforcing stable families, and in particular marriage stable families.
What will it do for Tory backbenchers? Would this be a huge boost?
What they think is important. I mean, Tory backbenchers at the moment rather feel that they've got a government which is not quite Tory enough, and this would help a bit.
All right, thank you. Last night, Croatia officially became the 28th member of the European Union. For many Croats, it was a moment for celebration. Flags were waved, fireworks set off, and lots of people put on rather scary wolf heads. But whilst Croats are celebrating joining the European Union, British MPs will vote for the first time this week on a bill which could eventually see the UK leaving. And even those who support continued membership argue that the EU is in need of serious reform. A lobby group, Business for a New Europe, is today launching a manifesto for reform of the EU with the backing of MPs from all three main parties. It says the European Union should be streamlined, cutting down on regulations and reforming the common agricultural policy, that it needs to focus on free trade with the rest of the world, and that the single market should be extended to all sectors of the economy. The group also has a warning for Eurosceptics. The manifesto argues that Britain will achieve more of what it wants if it gets stuck in rather than opts out, and that demanding unilateral opt-outs will alienate potential allies. But is that precisely what MPs are about to do? Another cross-party group is today stepping up the campaign for a referendum on Britain's membership of the EU. And on Friday, MPs will have their first chance to vote on a referendum bill which calls for a public in-out vote in 2017. It's a private member's bill being sponsored by Conservative backbencher James Wharton. He has David Cameron's backing, but it couldn't be brought forward by the coalition government because Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems won't support it. And as for Labour, they say the bill is a Conservative Party stunt and that they'll stay away. But Ed Miliband is also under pressure from some of his own MPs to commit to a referendum before the next election. Well, joining us now is the chairman of Business for a New Europe, Roland Rudd. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Unless, Roland Rudd, there is the threat of Britain pulling out of the EU, you don't stand a chance of getting any reform.
I couldn't disagree more. I think we have a great chance of reform, and we have a great chance of reform because when you go round the continent and you talk to ministers from different various countries, they all say, look, we're hugely supportive of the British competitive agenda, but phrase your arguments in the sense of what's best for Europe and not just what's best for Britain, and you'll achieve much more. And that's exactly what we've done today with our manifesto for a more competitive Europe.
No one would disagree with that in its broadest terms, but what do you say about this great chance for reform within the EU?
Well, I mean, I agree with what Roland wants to do in terms of the.
I think everybody would agree with that.
Well, except the European Union. I mean, we've been making these arguments for 2 decades in my memory. You know, I was making some of them myself 2 decades ago in precisely the terms that Roland argues. You know, this is good for Europe. You know? And we had the odd ally. The Germans were on our side. The French never were, and the Southern Europeans broadly weren't either. And I'm afraid that what's happened over the last 2 decades is it's got worse, not better. More regulation. More out of touch with the public at large, more unpopularity.
David, that's true to some extent, and I accept that. But right now is our opportunity. We had at our launch a very senior CDU German minister and supporter there who did exactly what you said, who said how much he wants to see the things that we want to happen in Europe. But it's not just Germany. When you go to Spain and Italy, I mean, Prime Minister Letta of Italy, who's going to be over here in July, I think he'll be supporting the same sort of reforms that we put forward.
If he's still Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think he will be. I think he will be. He's in a strong position, whether Berlusconi leaves him or not. I think he will be. Okay. But you look at Spain, and where it was 10% of the current account deficit of GDP, today it's 0, and they've achieved that through increased competitiveness. So they want to see the single market included for services as well.
Right. You're talking about increased competitiveness, which I think most people do agree with. All right, you say the EU doesn't. But let's have a look at unilateral opt-outs. Who agrees with Britain for Britain to have those unilateral opt-outs?
Well, I don't think unilateral opt-outs are the right way of phrasing the argument, and I don't like. And it's been interesting. I think the government has stopped talking about repatriation and has started talking about reform, because I think it's much more achievable, and I think that's the way to actually get through on a competitive agenda rather than try to get one or two things for Britain alone.
Well, William Hague talked about a red card. I mean, not just a unilateral opt-out historically, but one for the future, you know. And he's making a good point. I mean, one of the problems that we see now, let's put trade to one side for a second, in the legal, judicial area, you know, European arrest warrants and 140 other issues, largely we don't want to be part of. Now, actually, as luck would have it, we have an opt-out a lot of those, but they impinge on us in a way which nobody foresaw 40 years ago.
Yes, but David, you know, if you listen to the police commissioner or you listen to any of the security services, they like the European arrest warrant. And as they've said...
That's not an argument in favour, in my view.
Well, no, I think it is, because I think it's incredibly important to catch these people. And I think that you know, and their arguments are very clear that if you're going to do without them, if we're going to opt out, it's beholden on us to say what we're going to use instead. And we haven't put that argument yet. So I wouldn't be in favour of those opt-outs.
Right. And we haven't really heard in specific terms from the government, all right, you've given that example, of the other opt-outs that they're actually campaigning for. I mean, do you feel there is a sense now that the rhetoric is beginning to be toned down at the very top? We haven't heard the words repatriation, that actually there'll be more on trade and competitiveness than they will on individual opt-outs of things like the criminal justice system that you've been...
What you've got is an interesting problem, and that is that David Cameron and the rest of the government, William Hague and co, are setting, as it were, a hurdle for themselves to leap.
Yes.
And the higher they set that hurdle, the more likely it is that people are to turn around in a few years' time and say, you didn't do it, so we should leave. And you know, David has said, I want to argue in favour of staying in at the end of this. So the higher they set the hurdle, the more difficult that'll be. So there's a real conundrum at the core of the government's policy,
right,
which actually Lawson sort of pointed out with his comments.
But that's why you need to start the reform process now. Because if you wait until after the next election, you've almost, you know, you've waited too long, because you've got to start building the allies, building the reform now, trying to achieve some of this now, so you have something to show for it.
In timetable, I agree, but the trouble is there are just too many vested interests inside Europe, institutional, bureaucratic ones, which will resist this. We've got to have a lever, and the problem is that without an in-out referendum, at very least, I actually think we need more than that, but without an in-out referendum, we have no lever.
I think you've become too pessimistic, David. I remember the optimistic David Davis of old.
Too long.
Well, he's not alone in his pessimism, is he?
No, he's not.
He's not, but also it brings us to the politics of it, because while there isn't agreement of exactly what is, you know, needing to be negotiated on or reformed, the politics may come first. Now, there is this private members' bill, which is being called a publicity stunt by Labour, because in the end, they're only going to be Tory MPs voting on Friday.
Well, that's Labour's choice. If they don't turn up, I mean, that is their choice. I mean, they could be there and vote us down. If they thought it was a publicity stunt, they could do a deal with the Liberals and vote us down. But they haven't quite got the nerve for that,
No, but what they are talking about, apparently, is calling for a referendum next year.
Yeah, well, if they did that, they might well succeed. If they did that, they might, because they get a lot of Tory MPs on their side.
Including?
It could be including me. Depends on how they put the case. But yeah.
What do you think about Labour's discussions? They haven't said anything, but discussions that they could actually just have or call for a referendum next year. They would get support from probably, you know, a fair, sizable chunk of the Conservative Party, and that would be that.
I think it would be ill-advised. I mean, I supported the government's view on the referendum lock, that if there was another treaty change that transferred powers to Brussels, we should have a referendum. So I was totally in favour of the principle. I myself wouldn't have had one in 17 as called for by the party, but I understand the party politics behind it. And I think the likelihood is we will eventually have one, and I'm confident we can win. But my big thing is to take the politics out of it, because we're talking about Britain's interest and Britain's future economic interest at jeopardy if we leave the European Union.
And Vince Cable called it a terrible distraction.
Well, he's just wrong. I mean, there are two. I mean, it was in his own party's manifesto last time round. I mean, you know, somebody should just remind him of that.
Oh, we remind them all the time.
But there are two principal reasons. One is it's long overdue. Europe today is completely different from Europe 1975. It's long overdue that the people should have another say on it. But the second one is the question of renegotiation of the relationship. And I think that if you back that up with the referendum, it gives you far more power, far more capability. As the Irish, the Danes, the Dutch and the French have shown in the past.
I think you'd be surprised by how much support we've got in European capitals for this reform agenda.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We don't need any threat to achieve what we want to do.
Roland Rudd, thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking
Thank
to
you,
you.
Dave.
Now, the police have been in for a tough time of late as allegations of wrongdoing continue to emerge, the latest being that there was an undercover campaign to dig up dirt on the friends and family of Stephen Lawrence as they fought for justice for the murdered teenager. Today, a House of Commons Select Committee has recommended that police officers should have their pensions docked in serious cases of misconduct and for a new code of ethics to set out what is and is not acceptable behaviour. So how badly damaged has the reputation of the police in England become, and can it be restored? David Thompson reports.
Stephen Lawrence, Hillsborough, even Plebgate. A series of events some believe have seriously eroded trust in one of Britain's great institutions, the police.
I was a police officer for over 30 years, and I'm ashamed of what my colleagues were up to back in the day.
I think trust has eroded in the police over the last few years, and these constant allegations that are coming out at the moment really don't help. The police have got two very big problems. The first is that they're not very good at talking to people, particularly groups of people like young people that they're getting distanced from. And the second big problem they've got is they're just not good at confessing. They're not good at saying, this is the truth, we stand by it, we're really sorry about it, and it is the whole truth.
But are things as bad as they seem? An Ipsos Mori poll taken earlier this year but before the Stephen Lawrence allegations suggested that 65% of the public do still trust the police to tell the truth. That's behind doctors and teachers, but comfortably ahead of MPs and indeed journalists.
But it's the allegations surrounding people like Dwayne Brooks, Stephen Lawrence's best friend, and the murdered teenager's family that will be hardest for the police to overcome. It's claimed they were the targets of a failed smear campaign and even covert recording. And some believe that, if true, that had to be authorised from very near the top of the Met's chain of command.
My understanding is that the covert recording of the meeting between the police, Dwayne Brooks and his solicitor was actually signed off at a very senior level. And one can only assume that the other activities to undermine the Lawrence family were also sanctioned at a similar level. The public should be very concerned if these allegations turn out to be true, that at a senior level the police were authorised to undermine the Lawrence family, covertly record meetings, because those are the senior officers who are at the same time publicly saying that you can trust the police, that we're going to have a new regime, a new culture in the police that treats people with dignity and respect.
Many of the allegations against the police go back to previous regimes, but it's the people in charge at the Met and other English forces now who have to regain public trust.
Clearly, Bernard Hogan-Howe, the Commissioner, and other senior officers have got to say that things are different now. But of course, are we going to believe them? What we need to see is a clean record for a number of years, I think, before the public will again trust what senior police officers say.
Well, with us now is the chairman of the Hampshire Police Federation, John Apter. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Well, we've heard there about some of the things that have really scarred the police reputation over recent weeks. Operation Alice, that was about so-called Plebgate, Operation Elvedon, smear campaigns against victims, including the Lawrence family, and Hillsborough. I mean, the list is not great for the reputation of the police. What's gone wrong?
Well, I think many of these cases are historic cases. If you look at Hillsborough and indeed the Lawrence investigation, whilst there are new allegations have come to light recently, they're all historic cases. And actually the Police Federation and the 135,000 police officers who we represent would say that the victims from Hillsborough and indeed the Lawrence family deserve and must have justice, and that must be seen to be done. But these are historic cases which make it appear that policing is broken, and that's just not the case.
Or is it a case of better transparency and the fact now that the police are finding it more difficult to hide some of these historic cases or some of the injustices that have gone on, and there will be more of these coming to light?
Well, look, I've been a police officer for 20 years, And I've seen the changes, the real positive changes across the country from cases such as the Stephen Lawrence murder. And those great examples of progress must not now be hidden. But more importantly, the police officers we represent, 135,000 as I say, there is a shadow over their integrity because of the actions of a very, very small minority. And we mustn't allow them to dominate the headlines, which sadly is happening on a daily basis.
How bad is it?
Well, it is bad. I mean, Mr. Abbs is right. I mean, he's got a very, very large number of members who are good, upstanding public servants committed to protecting the public. So let's get that clear before we start. But the reason some of these are historic is because it's taken 20 years to expose it.
Well,
I mean, that of itself is a disgrace. And it's a disgrace on the police force, I'm afraid, because they were part of the ones who prevented it being disclosed. Some of it's not historic. G20, Plebgate, Operation
That's
Alice,
very recent.
Jean-Charles de Menezes, and this indicates actually is still systemic. I mean, some of those are about the filling of logs, and the arrangements filling in logs, frankly, encourage collusion, so they're wrong.
I think, though, what we find is when there is a transparent, thorough investigation, many times it is shown that the police, who do a very difficult job in very difficult circumstances, are shown to have been within the law and done what was expected of them.
Yeah, well, I'd expect that to be 100% of the time, you know. And the problem with, you know, you can't turn around and say, look, it's just 5%. 5%'s massively too many, you know, or 0.5%'s too many.
I agree, but police officers, they're not robots. They are human beings. And we are the first to say that they will make mistakes. And if police officers break the law, they deserve, rightly, to face the full force of the law. And indeed they do on many occasions.
But what all these cases show is that they haven't. That's the problem. Oh, it's been taken 20 years for that to happen.
But it's a relatively small number of cases, a significant but relatively
they're not
small.
minor, they're enormous
but I
cases.
could tell you daily, dozens, if not hundreds of cases across the country where acts of bravery, compassion, professionalism happen every day.
But John, one of the things about saying that they are and do act, police officers with integrity and professionalism, is it's totally undermined by these cases. People do not trust the police in the way they did.
I think it's wrong to say that the public don't trust the police per se.
No, I didn't say that. I said they don't trust them in the way they used to.
I think these recent events have been very damaging, and it's up to people like the Police Federation, ACPO, and indeed politicians to stand up and say this is a minority. This is a minority. They must be held to account. There must be full, transparent investigations.
Let's disagree. I think, sure, it's a minority. We agree that. But I think it's very, very important. It's important to the relationship between the police and the public, but it's important to the upholding of law and order in this country. I actually think it's time for a new era in British policing, frankly, and it needs a lot of things to change. From the original standards
there is already
right through.
a new era in policing. Policing has changed and evolved massively over the past 10 years.
But changing regimes, having new people at the top, isn't necessarily changing the culture of the police. And you mentioned the Police Federation, but I interviewed the Police Federation over the so-called Plebgate affair, and there was a feeling that the Federation were defending police officers' actions before even knowing what the full facts were. Do you accept that that perhaps needs to change, that sort of standing together before even knowing what is necessarily going on has to change?
Well, look, with Plebgate, there is an ongoing investigation.
Of course, but I'm just using it as an example
including members of the Federation.
Yeah, the Police Federation is a representative body which represents officers across the country, and they will act independently in the interests of their members. What we are seeing now is there is an independent review into the Police Federation, which I welcome, and that will see, I'm sure, significant
Well, I'm glad to hear it,
positive
because some of the
change.
representatives just simply told lies. Bluntly.
Well, that's not yet been found.
It's clear enough.
All right.
Hard
Well,
evidence.
you're right, there is an ongoing investigation, but let's look at some of the changes, some of the recommendations themselves. Should officers be fined for misconduct?
Well, ironically, there used to be, and then in 2008 the misconduct regulations changed.
And would you like them brought back in?
I think it's an option. It's an option for the panel members to impose a fine, which could be an alternative to something else.
Have their pensions docked?
It already happens.
Right, does it?
Indeed it does.
Will that sort of thing make a difference? I mean, if that already happens, fine, but bringing back the idea of fining
the penalties
officers.
are not enough. I mean, this goes back to the core of some of the way some policing is done. As I say, the way the logs are kept, rules that are applied, the way that investigations are done. I mean, take Plebgate, as you call it, the Downing Street affair. That's what, 9 months now. 9 months. You could have a baby faster than the Met has set about solving a simple operation that took 45 seconds.
Finally.
Investigations are very complex and protracted. I would rather them be far quicker. The IPCC, some investigations can go on for years, not months. And that's damaging.
All right. John Apter, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, let's have a quick look at the week ahead. This whole issue of MPs' pay is bound to run and run. An independent report is expected to say they should get thousands more. But the Prime Minister is urging restraint, as will the debate within the Tory party about when to recognise marriage in the tax system. There's pressure from the Conservative backbenchers on David Cameron to do so earlier rather than later. And Europe, surprise, surprise, will feature heavily, with James Wharton's private members' bill being voted on this Friday. And joining us now from a sunny College Green, yes, for once, are Kate Devlin from The Herald and James Forsyth from The Spectator. Welcome to both of you. Kate Devlin, how big a problem is MPs' pay going to be for David Cameron?
I think it's a very big problem. Part of what has happened is that the public has not forgotten and has not forgiven the furore over MPs' expenses. The independent body that was set up to try and take these kind of issues about pay and pensions away from MPs really just hasn't been successful in separating MPs from the process. And the public still think that they're in it for all they can get. And this, kind of process that there's been for the past couple of years to try and take them away from the process just hasn't worked. And if large increases do go ahead, MPs will get the blame from the public.
Do you think, Joseph, what can David Cameron do? Because, as Kate quite rightly says, this is an independent, or would be an independent recommendation. The idea is MPs won't vote on this, that they should just accept the recommendation.
When they set up IPSA, it was meant to be independent, it was meant to be arm's length. And as Kate says, it was meant to stop the controversy over MPs' pay and MPs' expenses by kind of depoliticising it. But it's such a fundamentally political issue, but I don't think you can. I think David Cameron's got a very difficult problem here, because a lot of his MPs say, look, we have fallen behind in salary terms, behind civil servants, of a kind of a senior civil servants, and other kind of big public sector professionals, people who run health trusts and all that. And they say we should be paid more, otherwise we're going to end up with Parliament where only people who are already wealthy or are backed by a trade union can afford to be in it. But David Cameron knows that the public would revolt at the idea of a large rise for MPs at this time of austerity. And it's going to add into his own problems with his backbenchers, because a lot of his backbenchers look at him and say, it's all right for you, David Cameron, you inherited money, your wife earns a small fortune every year, we don't. We need this cash.
Right, well, that'll be something for him to chew over in the next few weeks. Kate Devlin, let's look at the bill on Friday being voted on, the private members' bill on Europe. What impact do you think that vote will have?
I think it will. There are a couple of things that it will do, and I'm not sure what impact, to be honest, it will have in the end. It will be a great set piece. It will placate, at least for a short time, lots of Tory backbenchers who have wanted to see this. The problems are the cracks are starting to emerge. There's already lots of questions being asked about what this actually means. Would it actually mean a referendum? So basically the problem starts to become, if it's just a set piece without anything behind it, will there still be problems for the future?
All right, James Forsyth, very brief, you've got about a second.
I think it's a bonding exercise for Tory MPs. They're going to have this barbecue in Downing Street on Thursday night, and then they'll all turn up and vote and go home happy.
All right, thank you both very much. Well, that's it for today. Thanks to all our guests, particularly to you, David Davis.
My pleasure.